Should we have a little segment where we try to discuss what the name should be?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do that.
Let's just start it with exactly how this started with me sitting down.
All right.
And but welcome to those listening.
Yes.
This is No Lag podcast. We did a few of them about a year ago, and we kind of have been retooling things and figuring out what it is that we want to do, finding our voice and that kind of thing. And I think we struck on something with Steve Moulton here.
Hi.
And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to do a movie related podcast, but we're trying to figure out what to name it.
Yes.
So do you have a suggestion, Steve?
Well, in honor of the first movie we watched for this thing, I wanted to call it North by Northwest, since your name is Wes.
But that leaves you out completely.
It kind of does.
Unless we change your name to North.
Oh, like that Baby or that Elijah Wood movie.
Sure.
Yeah. I feel like Steve has kind of served me well so far.
Yeah.
What about... I feel like there might already be a podcast called Spoiler Alert, but I feel like since a lot of this podcast is going to be spoiling movies, if people have not watched these movies and they dare to listen, maybe we could put something in there with spoilers, like Steve and Wes spoil movies, or Wes and Steve.
We just call it the
spoiling movies.
We just call the spoilers. But I don't. The thing is,
that's got a negative connotation.
It does. And the thing is, I don't want people to think that necessarily we're going to be talking about new movies necessarily. I mean,
that's a good point.
Sometimes we will talk about new movies, but spoilers is sort of a recent, I don't know if I want to say phenomenon, but a recent thing.
Yeah.
Spoilers weren't really a thing in the past, or at least we didn't have a name for them in the past.
Right.
So I think when people think of spoilers, they think of like Game of Thrones.
Right. Okay.
We won't be talking about Game of Thrones, I don't think, on this podcast, but
nah,
since it's not a movie.
I mean, we won't focus on it, certainly.
Well, I mean, if they ever come out with a Game of Thrones movie, maybe we will. But for the most part, this is going to be... So look, maybe we should explain what the idea behind the podcast is.
Yes.
So there are a much more than a handful of movies that I have not seen.
Me too.
And the same goes for Steve. And we found a remedy for that.
Yes.
And that's this podcast. So we decided what we're going to do is every 2 weeks we're going to come out with this podcast on the No Lag podcast channel, and we're going to talk about 2 films.
Yes.
And one of us cannot have seen the films that we're going to discuss prior to the discussion.
Right. So if you've seen Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, but
Correct.
I have not, we can watch Psycho.
Correct. Have you seen Psycho?
I have, but
Okay.
I was just using that as an example because I'm pretty sure we've both seen Psycho.
I was about to add a movie to the bucket just now.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Okay.
I've seen Psycho possibly more times than I should have.
Yeah.
No, it's great.
So we're gonna watch a couple of movies. Some are old, some are newer. Sometimes we'll talk about things that are out in the theaters. Every once in a while, we might go see a movie in the theater. We might do some film festival stuff. We'll see how that goes. And we're just gonna talk about what we thought of the films, and the things that we got from the films, and whether we like them or not. So
Steve and Wes, or Wes and Steve, on the classics.
But they're not all classics.
Yeah, that's true. Are you saying Disney's Airborne is not a classic?
Spoiler alert.
We might be talking about Disney's Airborne.
Yeah. Eventually. Not today.
Not today.
Eventually. And by the way, spoiler alert, we're not going to be saying spoiler alert very often because we're just going to assume that if you're listening to this, you're okay with us talking about these films. So we do have 2 films that we've watched to start this off, but I do want to point out that in the future, at the end of every episode, we're going to go ahead and draw 2 films out of the Muppet Bucket. That's where we draw our films. And that way you will be able to watch the films prior to our next podcast. And when our next podcast comes out, you can kind of understand exactly what it is that we're talking about.
Yes. So you, listener, have a little bit of movie watching homework to do.
Yeah.
And that's always fun.
Yeah. So we didn't solve the problem of a name.
Not yet, but
maybe by the end of the episode we will.
Yeah, as we go on, if something really dawns on you, then boom, just shout it out.
Sure.
I've got a notepad here. Well, I've got some loose paper.
Sure.
And a pen on a magazine.
Yeah.
So if anything pops up that we need to write down, we can do just that.
Yeah. So should we jump into it with our first movie? Actually, why don't I say what the movies are, real quick for this
All right.
episode? The movies are North by Northwest.
Yes.
Steve alluded to that earlier, and Sophie's Choice.
Two extremely exciting movies that aren't at all sad and kind of morose.
Well, don't dissuade them from what I'm about to tell them. So, good movies. We'll get to that in a minute. But now is the time, if you have not seen North by Northwest, which you
Right.
can watch on, I'm not sure.
We watched it on Vudu.
We watched it on Vudu because I own it.
Yeah. But I mean, it's North by Northwest. It's easy to find.
You can find it. You can rent it pretty cheap. So you can get it on iTunes. You can get it on Vudu.
Yeah. It's probably on Netflix.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, so I don't want to say it is because
Touche.
it's a big classic. The other is Sophie's Choice, and Sophie's Choice is available on Netflix. So, and I believe it's available on Amazon Instant as well as of this recording.
Most likely.
So now's the time to pause, go watch those movies, and come back. We'll be here
Should we do like a countdown?
for.
1,999,099.
No, you mean waiting for them to come back? I don't think we want to count down the length of.
999,098.
I mean, Sophie's Choice was 2.5 hours. I don't think we want to that long of a podcast.
Okay.
All right. So should we jump into it then? I guess with our first movie.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So, why this podcast? Why pick me? What is it about us two that makes you think we're right to discuss these things?
That's a good question.
I have kind of an idea.
Well, okay. So I know you love movies.
I do.
You're an actor, so you work in film.
And a former published movie critic.
Okay.
Well, movie reviewer, I'll say.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't?
I did not know that.
Oh, get ready to live.
All right. And then I work in film.
Yes.
So we both have a passion for storytelling. And I think we both have this sort of addiction to film.
Sure.
We try to consume a lot of film.
Mm-hmm.
Your method is a little different than mine, which I think is kind of cool, kind of complimentary.
I don't know that I had a method.
Well, I mean, you will reconsume the same
Ooh,
film,
that's true.
right? And so you end up retaining a lot of information, whereas I consume a movie and then I'm on to the next thing I've never consumed before.
Okay.
So I don't retain as much information. So in that sense, it's very complimentary because we both sort of come from different schools of the filmmaking.
Yeah.
You know, we're on different sides of the camera, and we consume it a little bit differently, and so we remember different things. So that's one of the reasons why I chose you. I also like you. I think you're a nice guy, and I think
I
you're
like
very
you too,
personable.
Wes.
Oh, that's sweet.
And that's where my reason plays into it. Because I feel like in our circle of friends, we are largely regarded as pretty knowledgeable movie buffs.
Yeah.
And then the idea that there are still so many movies, so many, for lack of a better term, great classic movies
Right.
that we have not gotten around to seeing.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe without this podcast, I don't know if I would have gotten around to seeing them, but I should. And so with this podcast now, we've got this quest laid out before us.
Sure. And in between the two movies, we'll talk a little bit about our lists that we made. So
Oh, yeah.
we looked at the AFI Top 100, the IMDb Top 100. There's a 250, but I looked at the Top 100. I looked at a few different articles and things like that, and so made a list of movies that I shockingly have not seen, and was kind of surprised that I hadn't seen. I was like, surely I've seen that. No, I've never seen that.
It's weird when you feel that, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. So this is a way to kind of better educate ourselves, make us better artists, but also, you know, like just kind of do something that we love.
Right.
So, yeah, that's
I love it.
That's the answer.
Let's talk about movies, Wes.
All right, let's do it. So the first film, North by Northwest. So our first film is an Alfred Hitchcock film.
Yes.
It's a film about Roger Thornhill, who is an ad exec caught up in a case of mistaken identity. Namely, he's a government. He's not a government agent.
No.
They think he's a government agent on the trail of a group of foreign spies.
Right. Led by Mr. Van Damme.
Mr. Van Damme, who he initially Townsend. He thinks his name
Right.
is Townsend.
Played by James Mason.
So early in the film, Roger is kidnapped by these men. these foreign spies.
Kidnapped rather quietly too.
Rather quietly, kind of surreptitiously.
Yeah, they're just kind of
escorted
like,
out.
come with us. And he's like, well, maybe I should. I got a kick out of that scene.
Yeah, it's a good scene. And they kidnap him and they almost murder him.
Yes.
He gets almost murdered. And then beyond that, he gets framed for the murder of a U.S. diplomat.
Right.
And
inside the UN.
Inside the UN. And so he goes on the run. And the story continuously shows him mistaken as this other guy.
Yes. Mr. Kaplan
Mr. Kaplan.
is who everybody thinks he is.
And pushes him into the arms of a forward and sultry vixen named Eve, played by Eva Marie Saint. Yeah, she's quite something. That character, I didn't know movie characters in that era
Yeah.
were ever that forward and blunt on film. She puts it out there.
She's a forward lady.
Yeah.
Eva Marie Saint from On the Waterfront. And I think she even played Clark Kent's mom.
She did in Superman Returns.
She did, okay.
She did in Superman
But
Returns.
not the Christopher Reeves Supermans.
I don't think so.
Is that correct?
I don't think so. I think she would have looked too young maybe then. I don't know.
Okay.
Because that was the 70s.
Right.
She wouldn't
70s and 80s, yeah. So maybe she wasn't quite Martha Kent age.
Yeah. She's still working. I mean, she's like 90 and she's still working, or near that age.
Hey, if I was Eva Marie Saint, I'd still be working too. You know what I mean?
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
She may be more like 80, 85, somewhere in that area.
She can be as old as she wants, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, she was great in this movie. So immediately in the film, they sort of attempt to set the pace, which is interesting because the pace that they try to set is this like very fast pace mode. They do what we now know as the walk and talk.
Yes.
Where, you know, like if you've ever watched The West Wing or any Aaron Sorkin thing, where the characters are walking and they're like dictating what they have to do or what someone else has to do, and that's how the movie starts.
Yes.
And the whole movie is not that way. It's kind of interesting. It sort of is like a roller coaster. You have these moments that are fast where you've got a lot of fast talking, and then you have these sort of ebbs and flows where all of a sudden they're having like a long scene in a train car or a long scene in a library or a long scene in an auction house. But those scenes are also still intense. They just have a different kind of intensity than the standard walk and talk, hustle and bustle. So I thought that was kind of interesting because the style of film pacing evolves as the thing goes, just as the Roger character evolves.
Yes.
So, for example, like he's a liar essentially. The guy starts out as a liar, and he sort of ends the film as a liar. But the type of liar he is changes. So at the beginning of the film, he lies to get a taxi cab.
That's true.
He lies about his assistant. So he lies to get something that he wants. And by the time you get to the end of the film, the character's sort of gone through this roller coaster ride, and he lies to save someone's life.
Yes.
And I thought that was like just like kind of a clever way to sort of show character growth, because on the outside, it almost doesn't exactly seem like Roger. Yes, that's his name.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like Roger learns that much of a lesson by the end.
Okay.
Except that he puts himself out there to save somebody's life.
Yeah.
But kind of that last scene of the film in a train car with his lady.
Yeah. That
sort of like he's like
4-second scene.
Yeah, he's sort of like the same old Roger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. What did you?
Well,
weigh in on any of this?
it's funny that you bring up the liar thing, because I hadn't really noticed that. But yeah, in the very beginning, he's walking with a lady to a taxi, and he yells for the taxi, and then just goes to the first one that stops. Somebody else is already trying to get in it, and he says what, like, "Oh, sorry, son, I've got a very pregnant woman here," and just shuffles her in and steals the cab from the guy. And then I'd seen it, but I didn't really think of that. Unfortunately, to me, that was just sort of like, oh, well, there's a good trick to steal somebody's taxi cab. But
and it's not the first taxi, or it's the first of many taxi cabs that get stolen in the film. At least 2 more taxi cabs get stolen from people in the film, which is interesting.
Absolutely. But what I picked up more for his arc was that, he starts the movie as kind of, just a well put together self-sufficient but kind of a mama's boy, you know, like I mean, there was even a pretty early quote where he's like on the phone with his mom and somebody can't hear his mom's side of the conversation, and then when he ends it, he literally is just like, that was mother, like as if that person's supposed to know exactly who his mom is. And then I feel like as the movie goes on, he kind of has to become a tougher guy, you know, got to get his suit dirty, got to run from a few attackers and whatnot, and really I feel like he kind of becomes a full man by the end, and not, you know, because he's like a Madison Avenue ad executive, right?
Yeah, he's an ad exec. And
he kind of, you know, they paint him as this guy who just kind of does whatever his mom tells him as long as he can get drunk in the process. And other than that, just sort of tries to skate through everything. And now, by the end of this movie, he's a man in full, I guess you could say.
It's interesting because I
hope, anyway.
Sort of hits on some other points that I have that I'll make in a minute. But I got a little tweak to that
okay.
Of how I saw it. I saw him as a very big fish in a small pond at the very beginning. He's very large and commanding in his scenes initially. He's moving through a crowd. He's in a small elevator. He's in a small taxi cab. But he is this presence, and he's like whipping out this dictation, and he knows what he wants to on the card for the gift for his ex-wife. And, you know, I think he gets humbled by the personal life, the mother, for example, the assistant telling him not to drink too much because he's known to overdrink.
Right.
And it's like his professional life is he's this big character, and then he's kind of under the thumb of his mother.
Yeah.
You know, like to the point that not just, I missed calling her, I better send her a telegram to let her know where I'm at. You know, like, that's someone who's under the thumb of his mother. And when you see him in scenes with his mother later on, you get that feeling a little bit more. And I think it goes to accentuate this sort of big presence being made small and humbled again. And I think that that's necessary for this journey that he takes in becoming a good human being and becoming sort of a man and becoming a hero at the end of the film. Is you got to be humble in order for that to work.
Yes, I can agree with that. I can absolutely agree with that. What was your next point?
Well, my next point is really a long kind of overarching thing for the whole film.
Okay.
But if you have some things, I don't want to just like...
No, I've just got a bunch of little notes that I jotted down.
Well, maybe you can just throw them in, intersperse them when I get to...
Yeah, I'm thinking that will happen.
Sure. So kind of going with that big fish in a small pond to a minnow in a giant lake kind of a thing. They give us a lot of imagery to show that. So like I said before, he's standing next to his assistant. He's a man. He's got a presence, and he's forceful, and he's the boss, right? And even when he goes to meet the other ad execs or whatever at the bar, he's still got this sort of presence.
Yeah.
So you have him moving through a crowd, you have him in an elevator, you have him in the back of this taxi cab where it's all small, and then when he gets to the location that he's going to be kidnapped from, we start getting shots that are the camera's further out, and you have this giant hall with these tall arches, and all of a sudden he's small in these places, and this is the place where he loses power, and he gets taken by these people, and he gets taken to this house, and this house is big. They even referred to it as the big house.
It's gigantic.
Yeah, I mean, it's massive. This huge grounds, and so they bring him to this house, and again, he's powerless, and to the point where he's powerless to where he goes unconscious. Right. So we have him every time he becomes powerless in this film. He ends up in these giant places, and they get bigger and bigger as the film goes. And I thought that was a really great technique to show how small this guy had to get to become so great, right? To become the guy that saves someone's life.
Right.
So
that's a very good point that I did not pick up on at all. I will point out, you mentioned about being in the back of the taxi cab and everything, small at that point. Those cars are all gigantic. Like there's literally a part where he's in the back of the taxi cab with his with his captors, and he manages to get his whole body out around in front
Yeah.
of a captor to try to get to the door.
Yeah, they're
And
like
I remember,
58 Impalas or something. They're huge.
yeah, well, maybe even earlier than that.
Yeah, maybe.
But they're just so huge, and I remember looking at it and thinking, like, I've never had that much freedom of movement in an automobile before. Those cars were so big, and
Yeah.
that just struck me funny about how.
But he is like withdrawn when he's in those back
Yes.
seats, right? Like he's got two guys sitting next to him with guns in their pockets.
yeah, and he's just, I love when they first approach him and they just smack him on the shoulder, and he just kind of stops and looks at the hand and goes, "What's that supposed to mean?" Like that. and then they kidnap him and threaten his life.
Right. So Roger gets mistaken for this Kaplan fella,
Yes.
and he starts to investigate who this is. And he's gotten away from the bad guys, and he sort of starts to reclaim control with his life.
Right.
Although his mother is tagging along, and she's kind of snide the whole time, kind of
yeah.
bringing him back to earth. But so they go to where this Kaplan fellow's hotel room is, and they break into the room, sort of. They get the key to the room, and they go in. And once again, we're given an example of Roger being big.
Yes.
He's back in control, right? So he gets the guy's suit and puts the guy's suit on, and he's too big for the suit. So once again, he's in control, big man.
Right.
So he finds out that supposedly this Townsend guy who kidnapped him is going to be giving a speech at the UN. So he's going to go to the UN and confront him. But when he gets to the UN building, he finds that it's not the man that kidnapped him from
Right.
before. It's a completely different guy. It's the real Townsend.
The real
And
Townsend.
that this other guy was pretending to be Townsend, right?
Yes. And the real Townsend has literally no idea
What's going
that
on?
anybody's impersonating him or anything.
Right. And as he thinks he's going to get information from Townsend, he's showing him a photograph to see if Townsend recognizes the man in the
Yes.
photograph. Townsend gets a knife in the back.
Uh-huh.
And of course, in old-fashioned stupidity, Roger touches the knife and pulls it out of the guy's back, and he gets framed. He gets photographed and framed for this
Yeah.
guy's murder. And he loses control again. And what's the next thing we see? We see Roger
Yes.
running out of the UN from the top of the UN building, and he's a little tiny ant running
Right.
toward that car.
That was a
He's
beautiful
lost
shot.
control, and he's tiny again.
Yes.
It's really clear what Hitchcock is doing, but he's doing it in such a beautiful way
Yeah.
that you just admire it and you don't stop and think, you don't dwell on it. So that's sort of the power of Hitchcock. That's kind of what he does, you know, like he'll turn a shot of a close-up of a telephone into a long shot of somebody, you know, coming into a room.
Right.
Both things are important, and, you know, and that's just sort of like why he was so great at what he
Right.
did. So
Absolutely.
we find him insignificant again. Yes, you've got something you want to say.
Well, no, just one of my
feel it.
one of my notes from just a moment ago was
Yeah.
when somebody dies in front of you and they're slumping over in a crowded room with a knife in their back. Don't grab the knife with your bare hands and take it out. You're not going to help them. Just leave it there with your prints not on it. Go about your day.
And say, oh my gosh, someone killed this guy.
Yeah, for real.
That's
An
a
expert knife thrower killed this guy.
helpful tip by Steve Moulton.
I try, you know.
So then we go from this really large UN shot, and we start to slowly get smaller. So first we get smaller inside Grand Central Station, and people are looking for him.
Right.
And then we get even smaller onto a train car.
Yes.
And then, so he meets Eve
Kendall.
and you can't get any smaller than where they go with him. So he feels like he's completely in control. He meets this girl. They sweet talk each other. She knows who he is.
She sweet talks him
Ooh,
like
she-
a bag of Skittles
Yeah.
hiding a bag of Starburst.
She tells him where she's staying, which train car she's staying in, implies that she's going to help him hide from the police.
Yeah.
And then the moment where we see a big man in a small space, he's locked in the overhead bed, the overhead bunk, to hide him from the police. I don't think you can get much smaller than that for this guy.
Pretty much not.
And again, he thinks he's in control, and he's got this girl, and he thinks he's seducing her as much as she's seducing him, although we know that she's clearly in control of the seduction.
Right.
After the train stuff, it goes big again.
Yes.
So again, this roller coaster. So it goes big, it goes small, it goes big, it goes small.
He finds the tiny razor.
He does find the tiny razor. That's a really good point, actually, that I didn't note, that he finds this tiny razor, and we see him actually shaving with this razor, and it's like, again, a big guy with little things, you know.
Yeah.
But so he ends up at a literal crossroads,
That's true.
out in the middle of nowhere.
I believe they said it was somewhere around Indiana, right? Did she say he had to take a road out to Indiana? Because
Yeah,
they
I mean,
stopped
it
in
might
Chicago.
be. Yeah.
And then he had to catch a bus to a crossroads in Indiana where it's just completely flat and sandy yellow all around.
And it's the biggest location we've seen so far because it's the most vast. It has a horizon, right?
Right.
So, so we've gone from a hallway to a house to the UN to a crossroads. Now we're outside. So I want to talk about suspense now.
All right.
Take a quick break from this big to little thing. Hitchcock is extremely well known for suspense, but this scene shows why he was the master of misdirection. Roger is told to go out to this crossroads, and he gets dropped off by a bus.
Yes.
It's a bus stop in the middle of nowhere, which is crazy and awesome at the same time. He's told that he's going to meet the real Kaplan
Yes.
at this crossroads in the middle of nowhere. There's just like a cornfield and just empty fields around him.
Yeah.
And he's waiting.
Yeah.
And so you're expecting for Kaplan to show up.
Right.
Well, we suspect that maybe not Kaplan's going to show up.
Yeah, because don't we know the truth?
Because we know that we know the truth about Eve at this point. We know that Eve is working with the bad guys. She sends the bad guys a note on the train saying, "What do I do with him in the morning?"
Right.
So she tells him to go meet Kaplan
Yeah.
at this crossroads. So we're waiting, but we know that Eve may be double crossing him. So we know to expect something, but we don't know when and how. But we
Yes.
assume it's this car that's driving right towards him.
Yeah.
And then that car zooms past.
Right.
Right? And then another vehicle starts coming.
Yeah.
And that vehicle zooms past. And then another. And then all of a sudden, across the street, out of the cornfield,
Yeah.
comes another car. And a man gets out of the car. And the man slowly walks over to the side of the road. And he's across the street from him. And Roger's like, that's got to be Kaplan, right?
Gotta be my dude.
So he goes over there, and it's still not Kaplan.
Yeah.
Then a bus comes. So you're expecting all these. So he's waiting for all these cars.
Right.
But it's when he talks to that stranger, before that stranger leaves, that the stranger clues the audience in
Yeah.
that there's been misdirection going on this whole time, and that we shouldn't be looking for the obvious. We should be looking for the thing that sticks out.
Right.
And that thing that sticks out is a plane that is crop dusting an empty field.
Right.
So then we get maybe one of the most famous attack/chase sequences in film history. It's not much of a
Absolutely.
chase exactly, but
But that shot, I
Yeah.
bet I've seen that shot on my TV screen once a year since I was born because it's that famous of a shot.
right.
It is always referenced. It is always
You see photographs of it.
Right.
It's him running from the plane, and the plane's coming down to buzz him and just chop him up.
chop him up in its propeller.
Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like that's a really clear, if anybody wants to know a good example of misdirection, in a classic misdirection in a film, that's the scene to watch. Not only do you get to see this really classic scene that you've seen imagery from, but you get one of the best examples
Yes.
by a master.
Agreed.
So he escapes this big location where he's lost control. He ends up back in a hotel room and confronts Eve, back to a smaller location, and he gets a suit cleaned, and then he's gonna basically follow Eve to the auction house, which is really the smaller location that I'd like to focus on, because
Yeah.
this is the scene where he takes control again.
Right.
So he goes in this auction house. He confronts everybody. He sees that he's pinned down, and he creates such a disturbance that he not only gets picked up by the police and escorted out, but he makes them aware of who he is, which in turn gets the government aware of where he is.
Right.
And sort of gets him rescued and clued into all this stuff about Kaplan. So again, big location, back to smaller location, and so on. Then we go to the last big set piece.
Yes.
The climax of the film. Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore.
Other than the Grand Canyon,
Right.
there probably isn't a bigger set piece that they could have, a bigger location to go bigger than the cornfield
Right.
with the horizon.
Yeah.
I mean,
I agree.
The final fight is on the faces
Yeah.
of these presidents.
Which is foolish.
Foolish.
If you're ever being chased and you find yourself at the top of the faces of Mount Rushmore, figure out something other than trying to climb down the smooth stone faces of Mount Rushmore, please.
Right. And they make a point of showing the mountain from far away so you see them small on this thing. This is the smallest that Roger ever gets in the film, and it's also the most helpless because there's a moment where Eve is dangling off the edge. She's trying to save her, and he's dangling off the edge, and he is so desperate that he calls out to the villain who is trying to kill him to help them. That's desperate.
Extremely desperate.
The most humble that Roger gets.
That villain played by Martin Landau.
Martin Landau.
Living legend Martin Landau.
Yeah.
Wait, is he still alive?
I think he died.
Did he?
I don't know. We should look it up while we're talking about it.
Well, nevertheless, legendary Martin Landau. Very young in this movie, still looks like a terrifying human being. He looks like the kind of guy that you would expect to step on your fingers if you were hanging on a ledge.
Oh, maybe he's still alive. He was the same age,
hope so.
roughly, as Eva Marie Saint
Oh, all right.
in the film. It says that he is still alive according to Wikipedia.
Okay, good. I feel better about this.
Yeah.
I have a knack for mentioning people who turn out to be dead, and it makes me sad when
I
that
kind of
happens.
thought when we were watching the film, I was like, did he die? I couldn't remember.
Sure looked it up.
Famous for Mission Impossible,
Yeah.
the TV series. Very famous for Ed Wood with Johnny Depp, the Tim Burton film. Won an Academy Award for that.
He did, didn't he?
Yeah, he won Best Supporting Actor for that.
That's great.
Great actor.
Yeah. I mean, he's Martin Landau. He's seen it all, and he's done it all.
So he has this big fight on Mount Rushmore,
Yes.
and of course the good guy's probably going to win and get the girl at the end. So he's this small thing on this this gargantuan face, and then once he's completed his mission and he's back in control, where is he? Back in that train car
Back in that train car
with his lady.
on the top bunk
Yeah.
with Mrs. Thornhill. It's probably not exactly how he said it, but it was close.
Yeah, it was something pretty close. And the last shot of the film, fairly comical.
Yes.
If there's any kids listening, parents cover up their ears. There is definitely a reference to them having sex at the end of the film. He pulls her up onto the bunk. It's very clear that they're about to get busy, and the train,
As a newlywed couple is entitled to do.
and the train enters the tunnel literally.
Yes.
So, that's kind of a fun thing. You have a couple, any other notes, any other thoughts?
I feel like I've got so many. Nothing that really sheds light on anything. But one that was funny. Oh, so should we give up the truth about Kaplan, or should we maybe let that be one thing that we...
Sure, one thing we don't talk about.
All right, so we're not going to tell you who Kaplan really is.
Right.
Let's see here. I wanted to point out that there was a very funny line early in the movie. I think it might even be before he gets kidnapped, where Roger Thornhill says something about mother's just moved into this new place. It's all white paint and no telephone.
Right.
and it just struck me as so odd that like I've never been alive in a time where you don't just move into a house and boom, set your phone line up. And now with cell phones, we don't even have to do that. We've just always
Right.
got our own phone line. And so the idea that he says it almost as if it's a cliche about new houses, all white paint and no telephone, that cracked me up quietly, but it cracked me up that just, when was this movie? 50, 60 years ago?
Right.
And it's like things have changed so drastically.
It's funny you mention that. I actually watched a new movie in the theater recently,
Yeah.
and one of the characters, they're in an electronics shop, and they're looking for a phone. Find a push-button or rotary phone. They say that in this movie. It was made this last year. And I thought, those exist? Do those still exist?
Huh.
She said, it can't be an electric phone. It can't be something we have to plug in.
Yeah.
I it blew my mind. But but anyways, I think it's just kind of going along with what you were saying about the phones. It's sometimes it's interesting to go back and watch these older films and kind of realize the age that we live in now.
Yeah. Just see how different the world, or at least America, was back then.
Yeah.
It's trippy. It's trippy, man.
Trippy. So there was another thing that I thought was kind of interesting. It's kind of a David Lean, director David Lean,
All right.
who directed Lawrence of Arabia, which
All
is
right.
in our bucket.
It's in the bucket. We might watch it.
We'll watch it eventually.
Right.
So it's a sort of a David Lean thing that I love. It's one of my favorite techniques, and that's you may not have noticed this, but almost the entirety of the film,
Yes.
Roger is on the left-hand side of the screen.
Oh.
Almost the entire film.
I don't think I did notice
When
that.
you go back and you think about, there's a few times when he's not, like when he's driving a car, you can't kind of get around that.
Yeah.
But they do consistently show the car driving from the front of the car, so it's on the left side of the screen.
Yeah.
When he sits across from the men in the bar at the very beginning of the film, he's on the left side of the screen. When he's in the taxi cab, left side of the screen. Walking with his assistant, left side of the screen. When he's
Yeah.
on the train having dinner with Eve, left side of the screen. He's meeting with Van Damme at the end of the film at Mount Rushmore, left side of the screen. The part of the cliff that he hangs from, the left side of the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And that's sort of an Odyssey thing, right? It's sort
Alright.
of a storybook kind of thing where when you read a book and you're going on this journey with these characters classically, you read from the left to the right. So you associate the left being the beginning and the right sort of being the end.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a neat, subtle trick to kind of show that this guy is sort of on this journey. When he's at the crossroads, what
He's
side of the
waiting
street?
on the left
Waiting
side
on
of
the
the
left side of the
street.
street. Yeah.
He comes in from sort of the left. I mean, they show the crossroads as a bit more of an X than a cross, but he certainly.
Yeah, and when he
Comes in
goes
from
into
the-
the corn, he
Yeah.
goes in from the left. So
Good point.
yeah, it's kind of a neat, fun, old school filmmaking technique that I really like. I do want to point something out about it. If you give me just 1 second.
I'll give you
So-
9 seconds.
So Hitchcock worked a lot with Jimmy Stewart, but he wanted Cary Grant for this role of Roger Thornhill.
All right.
And Hitchcock was working with Jimmy Stewart. I can't recall the movie at the time off the top of my head, but he was working with Jimmy Stewart, and he told him that he's got this film, North by Northwest. He was super excited about it. Jimmy Stewart assumed, because of his relationship with Hitchcock, that the role was for him.
Oh.
And Hitchcock didn't know how to get out of that.
Oh.
So he delayed production on this film
Yeah.
until he knew that Jimmy Stewart was busy filming something.
Nice.
So Jimmy Stewart had to turn the film down.
Way to go, Hitchcock.
Just a little fact that, like this guy was super deliberate in everything he did.
Yeah.
The whole thing with the blondes, if you've seen Hitchcock or the other Hitchcock, the one that was on like HBO or whatever, they did like a miniseries.
There was Hitchcock, and then there was The Girl, right?
The Girl, yeah, which is another Hitchcock thing,
Yeah.
basically. But so he had this thing for blondes, so of course he casts Eve Marie Saint in it, and her hair looks amazing in it.
It does.
It does, right? Her hair was like truly exceptional in this film.
Yeah, I have to wonder how many hours she spent in hair before each shot. 'Cause
Right.
her hair was. I mean, even to the point where like there's all these scenes where they're Frenching each other,
Yeah.
Well, they're not at all.
And he's
They're-
barely touching her hair.
Yeah, they're kissing each other, and I mean, you can plain as day see Cary Grant's hands just like near her head, but like almost like he was afraid to touch her gorgeous hair.
It's like Comic-Con rules. Like when
Yeah.
you go meet somebody, you're not really supposed to touch them. You just put
Yeah.
your arm kind of around them, but never touch them. Yeah. Yeah. So Hitchcock was so meticulous about everything, you know. So he took, you know, he knew exactly who he wanted for the film. The blonde girl. He didn't like the wardrobe that they gave her initially, so he
Yeah.
personally took her to like Bergdorf's and bought all of her clothes for her for the
Wow.
film.
All right.
So that because he was like, I want her in these very specific things. And I think when you first see her, I want to say she's wearing black when he runs into her. She's
That-
wearing a black overcoat.
Sounds correct.
Very important that she's wearing black there. But when she's in the train car later on and they're kind of dressed down, she's very white. She's wearing
Yeah.
white and she's very pure. And that's not a mistake.
No.
You know, and he went and picked those clothes out himself with her. He planted 100 trees on the studio lot so that way they could film this forest scene the way he wanted to shoot the forest scene.
Wow.
I mean, you know, he just was a cut above the rest, and there aren't very many directors today that are like that.
Nope.
I can think of a handful of them.
I don't even know if I can think of a handful.
Well, I mean,
Maybe
there's
3.
Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
David Fincher is probably one that's very meticulous.
All right.
Um,
I feel like Tarantino goes in for some of that stuff.
Tarantino more now than when he started.
Yeah.
Now he has the ability to do it. When he started, he sort of like used what he could get.
Yeah.
And so Tarantino stuff wasn't very imaginative early on.
Yeah.
But now his stuff has scope.
Right.
And so he has the ability to do that. So yeah, Tarantino maybe.
Anderson, Wes.
Wes
And
Anderson,
Paul
Paul
Thomas
Thomas Anderson for sure.
Yeah. The two Andersons.
That's a handful right there. That's 5.
There you go.
I mean, we could go on and on. I would say Ridley Scott used to be one, maybe not as
Sure.
much now. That's like sort of the opposite of Tarantino, right? Like that's a dude who like had very, very specific things, and now it's sort of you feel like when you watch a Ridley Scott movie now that maybe you don't see his vision as well anymore.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I'll have to do an oldie and newie comparison. with
sure.
him.
Like, well, I mean, go watch Alien
Yeah.
and then Prometheus.
Oh yeah.
And compare those two and see which one feels like it's more stylistic and which one
right.
feels more like a bland like Hollywood film. I'm one of the few people I think that didn't have a problem with Prometheus. I
Yeah.
mean, I definitely see problems that people had with it. They didn't ruin the movie for me. I also think that there's some deeper things going on in Prometheus than most people are looking at. But
Right.
but yeah, you know, if you compare those two films, it's like apples and oranges.
I'll have to try that.
Yeah. So that was North by Northwest.
Yes.
Unless you've got something else to add about it.
Well-
I'd love to hear.
I'm trying to inject a small segment called Steve's Coffee Countdown, which is where I report on how long it took me to doze off during the movie and my caffeine levels at the time. So in North by Northwest, I'd be willing to bet I was on probably 9 hours of sleep and about 3, maybe 3.5 cups of coffee. But I started dozing off pretty quick watching this movie. I almost think it has just something to do with my brain's ability to focus on anything from before 1980. I don't know why that is. I told Wes before, like when I was a little kid, I really just could not pay attention to anything on TV if it was in black and white. And this movie's in beautiful full color, but I just kept dozing off, and I was awake as I could possibly be when I came over here. But man, I just kept dozing off, and it drove me crazy.
It is almost 2.5 hours, and I will say,
2 hours 37.
no, that was Sophie's Choice, which we'll get to in a minute. This was, I just looked at IMDb and it said 2:16 on IMDb.
Oh,
so
okay.
but I think because of the intentional roller coaster of pacing,
Yeah.
which nowadays I think people would look at as a real negative. People would say
Absolutely.
the pacing is inconsistent. I think when you do it intentionally like this, I think it has merit. But I can understand how that could be like kind of off-putting to a modern viewer. and how that could maybe throw your energy off.
Yeah, and also I just think attention spans were just stronger back then because
Yeah.
there wasn't so very much stuff competing for it.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, there were a lot of movies coming out, but going to the movies was like an ordeal. Like,
Right.
you wore nicer clothes.
Right.
The food was a little bit better. Like, even the candy back then was better quality chocolate and all that stuff, and it wasn't exactly cheap. It was a real experience going to the movies.
Yeah.
And now we're just so used to like people talking and turning their
Right.
phones on and just I'm not gonna
Jerks being jerks.
I'm not
That's
gonna go off on my rules of going to the cinema rant.
That's okay. Everybody behave yourselves. Let's say that.
I'm maybe one day, if people want to know the rules of going to cinema as I see it, we can discuss it. But like for me, like going to the cinema is like my church. I don't mean to make anyone feel like I'm being sacrilegious, or I'm not trying to be offensive towards anyone's religion. I'm using that term as a way to like help people understand the reverence that I feel towards going to cinema. I don't actually worship cinema as if it's a deity. But yeah, so for lack of a better word, it's my church. So, when I go to the theater and people are disrespectful, they got their feet up on the things or whatever. Well, again,
It's
people
not
want to
your
know
living
my
room,
rules.
folks.
Yeah,
My guess is anybody listening to this is already on our side.
probably.
So get your guns and no, I'm kidding. Don't.
Oh God, please don't. No.
I'm totally joking about that. That's terrible.
I actually committed a sin against one of my rules. Since we're going with the church thing, let's go with sin.
All right.
I was in the theater with a friend of ours recently, and we saw somebody on screen that we both enjoy
Okay.
that I didn't know was in the movie, and I was pointing at like, look.
I don't think that's
and we were kind of
so
hushed,
bad.
like talking excited, except that there was something subtle they were doing with that character, and I kept pointing at him.
Oh.
And then the other person pointed at him when the subtle thing started happening, and I thought, if I was sitting behind us right now, I would be pissed off.
Oh, okay.
So I apologize if the people that were sitting behind me at Terminator Genesis
Oh, it was Terminator Genesis.
if anybody's listening that was sitting behind me, I apologize for that. I try not to do that again.
Wes apologizes. I was not there, so I apologize for nothing.
Fair enough. All right, should we